You wake up and you are not quite human, not the way modern scientists would define it. Your brow ridge juts forward like a shelf of bone. Your nose is enormous, wider and more projected than any face you will ever encounter. Your chest is a barrel, your legs are short, your fingers are thick and powerful enough to snap wood with your bare hands. You are, by almost every measure, built for a world that is brutal and cold and immediate. You are a Neanderthal. And tonight, you are going to try to impress someone. The someone in question does not look like you. She is taller and more slender, with a flatter face and a rounder skull that bulges at the back. Her chin comes to a point. You do not have a chin, not really. Her limbs are longer. Her skin catches the firelight differently. She arrived at the valley edge 3 days ago with a small band of people who move quickly and speak in a way you have never heard before. Not grunts, not short forceful sounds. Something longer, something that loops and shifts and seems to carry more weight than sound should be able to carry. She is a Homo sapiens, and according to the DNA evidence your descendants will leave behind roughly 40,000 years from now, this meeting will matter enormously. Here is what the science actually says. In 2010, Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology sequenced the first complete Neanderthal genome. What they found changed everything. Between 1 and 4% of the DNA in every living person of non-African ancestry today traces directly back to Neanderthals. Not as a contamination error, not as a fluke, as inherited genetic material from actual interbreeding events. You and the woman by the fire are not just neighbors. You are, in some meaningful biological sense, compatible. But getting to that point, that is the story. Your species, Homo neanderthalensis, has lived in Europe and Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years. You have survived glacial cycles that would have killed almost anything else. You have hunted mammoths with thrusting spears, buried your dead with what appear to be intentional arrangements of flowers and ochre, and created pigment-marked shells that some researchers interpret as personal ornaments. João Zilhão at the University of Barcelona has argued for years that the shell ornaments found at Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, dated to at least 115,000 years ago, represent symbolic behavior, the kind of thinking that says, I want to be seen in a particular way. That is not nothing. That is almost vanity. That is almost fashion. So you are not an empty creature. You are not the brutish, hunched, club-swinging cartoon that the word Neanderthal gets used for when people want to insult someone. You have a language of some kind. The question is, what kind? Here is where it gets complicated. Your hyoid bone, the small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat that anchors the muscles of speech, is essentially identical to the one in a modern human. Philip Lieberman at Brown University has pointed out that this suggests Neanderthals were physically capable of producing complex vocalizations. Your FOXP2 gene, a gene strongly associated with language and fine motor control of the mouth, carries the same modern human variants that your sapiens neighbors carry. So, anatomically, the machinery is there. But language is not just anatomy. Language is also neural architecture, cultural transmission, the social infrastructure needed to pass complex syntax from one generation to the next. And the behavioral evidence, the explosion of symbolic art, the rapid spread of new tool technologies, the layered storytelling that seems to accompany early modern human sites, suggests that your neighbors may have crossed a threshold you are still approaching. When she speaks, you hear it as a kind of music you cannot quite follow. When you respond, she hears something dense and effortful, physically powerful, but grammatically sparse, not meaningless, not animal, but not the same. And yet, researchers studying Neanderthal social groups have found evidence of individuals who survived serious injuries, fractured limbs healed crookedly, skull trauma recovered from, meaning someone cared for them. Someone kept them fed and warm and alive through weeks of helplessness. Eric Trinkhaus at Washington University has documented dozens of these cases. Neanderthal groups were small, probably 15 to 30 individuals, bound by kinship and proximity. They knew each other deeply. They had to. Homo sapiens groups were already larger, more fluid, more connected to distant networks. They traded objects and ideas across hundreds of kilometers. They stored information in symbols on cave walls. Chauvet Cave in southern France, dated to around 36,000 years ago, holds some of the most sophisticated animal paintings ever discovered, executed with an understanding of shadow and depth and movement that suggests a mind, not just recording the world, but interpreting it. You do not paint caves, or at least, the evidence for Neanderthal cave art is fragmentary and contested. What you do is survive. What you do is endure. So here is the scene. Reconstruct it. You approach the fire where she sits. You bring something, meat, probably, or a shaped stone, a gift that in your world carries weight. You are enormous next to her, half again her mass in muscle and bone. Your eyebrow ridge creates a shadow across your eyes that probably reads as anger or intensity, even when you feel neither. You try to modulate your voice, to make it softer, lower, less abrupt. She watches you with the particular alertness of a species that has learned to read faces very quickly. She is deciding something. Her band has been moving through this territory for 2 seasons. Her group makes decisions collectively, loudly, with a great deal of what looks to you like performance, gesture and tone and volume rising and falling in ways that seem almost theatrical. Your group communicates more directly, less ornamentation, less ceremony. When you want to say something, you say it, or you do not say it at all. What would courtship have looked like across this divide? We do not know precisely. We can infer. Paola Villa and Will Robrooks, reviewing decades of archaeological evidence in 2014, concluded that the behavioral gap between Neanderthals and early modern humans was real, but narrower than once assumed, and that the two populations overlapped in Europe for somewhere between 2,600 and 5,400 years. That is not a brief encounter. That is generations of proximity. Long enough for cultural exchange. Long enough for the kind of contact that leaves genetic traces. The genome does not lie. Someone said yes. What is stranger, and what the DNA record makes increasingly clear, is that this was not a single isolated event. It happened multiple times, in multiple places, with multiple populations. Benjamin Verneau and Joshua Akey, working at the University of Washington, identified distinct pulses of Neanderthal DNA in modern human genomes, suggesting several separate admixture events. Not one meeting, several. Which means that whatever your communication lacked in complexity, whatever your face read as that it should not have, whatever made your courtship awkward and cross-species and improbable, it worked, repeatedly. Consider what those children would have inherited. From you, a denser bone structure, enhanced cold weather adaptation, immune system variants that had been tested against 400,000 years of European pathogens. From her, the social networks, the symbolic language, the long-range planning that would eventually build civilizations. From both, something hybrid, something that fit neither world perfectly but could navigate between them. A 2017 study by Sriram Sankararaman and colleagues at UCLA found that certain Neanderthal-derived genetic variants in modern humans are associated with increased keratin filament production, which affects skin and hair, adaptations well suited to cold climates. Others have been linked to immune response. The inheritance was not random noise. It was functional. You gave something real to the future, not through conquest, not through war, through a fire, an offering, a willingness to sit across from a face that was different from yours and stay anyway. Now look in the mirror. Between 1 and 4% of your DNA, if your ancestry traces to Europe or Asia, came from a moment like the one described above. A Neanderthal tried to make an impression. A Homo sapiens decided to stay. And 40,000 years later, you are here, with your modern language, your rounded skull, your pointed chin, carrying a small fragment of someone who woke up in the cold and did not look quite human. Not the way we used to define it, but perhaps exactly the way we should.